Okay, hi everyone. My name is Tenley Peak. I'm the Assistant Director in the Alumni Office at Binghamton. I'm very excited to welcome you to the Alumni Career Connections Talk with Lauren. She is joining us from New York City and has some great information to share in her story of how she got to where she is today. For those of you who this is your first Alumni Career Connections, just a quick overview of what will happen. I'll turn it over to Lauren. She'll share her story for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions for the remaining 45. Again, this event's really great because we like you all to run the conversation because we know that you have a lot to learn and have a lot of questions. So please do not hesitate to ask any. If you would like, you can ask them over the microphone, or you can ask them in the chat box. I'm more than happy to share that as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Thanks, Tenley, and thanks, Lindsay, for putting this together both. I appreciate it. It's great to meet everyone. Happy Tuesday. Although Tuesday feels like Monday, which feels like Saturday, it's sort of like one big long day that's been the past year. I know this has been a very different year and challenging year. But for me, I'm really excited to be doing this. I'm really excited for technology like Zoom and Google Hangouts and everything else that make things like this still possible. So like Tenley said, I will go off on a very long tangent about what I've been doing since I left Binghamton however many years ago. And then please ask any questions that you might have. Make this a conversation. This is, I'm an open book, so whatever you got, throw my way. So I graduated in 2006, which if you count the gray hair on my head, that means I'm much older than most of you, if not all of you. And I went, so let's see, I'll start from the beginning. So I knew that I had wanted to go to Binghamton University for a little bit. I had also applied to Northeastern, but Binghamton University gave me the opportunity to play softball. So I spent 4 years there playing Division I softball. I was a 3-year captain. I became captain of the team while sitting on the bench. I was a walk-on. I wasn't very good, but I still had a really great time. It was such an incredible experience. I was chatting with Tenley earlier today. She played softball for Lehigh, and so she knows the demands and the rigors of playing a Division I sport while getting a really phenomenal education at Binghamton. I think this is a secret that I don't tell most people, but as mentioned, I was a walk-on and I quit 3 times actually during fall ball. I wasn't sure that I wanted to play. I wanted to put my studies first, and the rigors of playing a Division I sport, they were a lot. And so I quit 3 times, but I have to say that playing Division I softball was the best experience and the best opportunity I was given. I was able to meet a phenomenal group of people. I was able to represent Binghamton at the America East Conference level and the NCAA level. It allowed me to grow and shaped me truly, into who I am today. I've always had a passion for sports. I'll tell you a little bit more about my background as we get on with things. But while I was at Binghamton, I studied English and rhetoric. It was the closest I can get to a communications degree at the time. I don't know if things changed at all. You'll all have to tell me. But it was a phenomenal experience reading a lot of Shakespeare and giving a lot of speeches. Senior year, around April, I was very lucky to get a job working at Virgin Atlantic. And what I'll say is, I spent my time at Binghamton doing a bunch of different interviews. I interviewed in the athletics department. I interviewed for one of my interned with one of my professors. I also was an intern at the Women's Sports Foundation for a summer. I got to study abroad during one of the summers. I went to Madrid. It was a phenomenal experience. But I knew that when I left Binghamton, I was interested in doing something that wasn't related to sports in some capacity. So my first job was with Virgin Atlantic, and I remember leaving practice, and I was upset because I wasn't sure that I wanted to work for an airline. And I had very limited perspective and scope on what Virgin meant as a global brand, how big it was, how brilliant Richard Branson was. I just didn't have that understanding, if I'm being honest with you. So selfishly and annoyingly, I was kind of bummed that I had this job. I was like, what am I going to do for an airline? But regardless, I started working 2 weeks after I graduated, and it was a phenomenal experience. I very quickly learned what it meant to work for a globally recognized brand, what it meant to work within the business field. I ended up getting a job in the communications department, but I was doing international events as well, which was pretty cool. And during my time there, I got to dive into doing partnerships too. I came up with some pretty cool partnerships that we executed here in New York. I got to write speeches for Richard Branson. I got to travel the world. I got to take press to Nairobi because we opened up a Nairobi flight. I'd never been to Africa before. It was a phenomenal experience. So it was sort of a crash course into what working in the communications field could look like. And for me, and as I continue on with my story, you'll recognize that it's not a linear path, and I don't do traditional comms or PR. That has never interested me. And I think too, and I say this in jest, it's a bit tongue in cheek, but during my first review at Virgin, my boss had asked me what my goals were. And I was very close with her, and she knew that I was joking, but I wrote that I had no goals. And it's not that I don't have goals, and at the time, it's not that I didn't have goals, but I never had a goal in mind that would put me on a dedicated path. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't want to be a doctor. I was more open to the experiences that were coming my way. So if you had asked me senior year while I was at Binghamton, if I wanted to go work for an airline, I would have said no. And that's what I had said at one time. So I like to stay open to the opportunities that come my way. And I'm so glad I did with Virgin because it was a phenomenal experience. I worked there for about 2.5 years. It was based in South Norwalk, Connecticut, and I wanted to be working in the city. I was in my early 20s at the time, and an opportunity with Major League Baseball came about. And so I had interviewed for it. And funny story with that is I applied, they said, come on in, we'd love to chat with you. So I took the train in. I was there an hour early, 15 minutes before. I go on up in the elevator and I say, hey, Lauren Verrusio here to see Matt Bourne. And they're looking and they're looking. They're like, you must mean on the 5th floor. And I was like, okay, phew, let me go to the 5th floor. Back in the elevator, got up. Hi, Lauren Verrusio here to see Matt Bourne. And she looks at me and she said, oh, honey, Matt Bourne is at the commissioner's office. That's in Midtown. You're downtown. You're never going to make this interview on time. And so I ran out. I caught a cab. I told the taxi driver, can you get me to Midtown as fast as possible? I'll give you all the money in my wallet. I texted my father. I said, I blew it. I pulled an Ellen. Ellen's my mom. She's funny. We always use Ellen, jokes, whatever. I said, I pulled an Ellen. I blew it. I'm not going to get this. I still go up. I'm about a half hour late at this point. I then, of course, make me fill out a ridiculous form that makes me even later for this interview. Matt and I had a very good conversation. At one point, he referenced the downtown office, and I interrupted, and I said, oh, yes, I've been there. It's quite lovely. Very great space you have downtown, and I tried to make a joke out of it. Somehow, he gave me the job, and, when I went to leave MLB, and I'll tell you what I did there in a second, at my going away drinks, he said, LV, you haven't changed since the day I met you. And I said, Matt, I'm not sure that's a good thing, but I appreciate my time here. And so we have a great relationship. I'm now actually getting dinner with him and his wife on Friday. While I was there, I was hired to do business PR. And it was fine. It was great. It was my entry point into MLB. And I knew that doing business PR and announcing when, we had a contract extension with Pepsi wouldn't be my career defining opportunity. And so what I recognized while I was there was MLB was talking to its core audience and its core audience only. And that were people like my dad. And I saw an opportunity to grow the sport to fringe fans. And so I started the entertainment department while I was there. And so this meant I got to do fashion photo shoots with GQ magazine during spring training with people like Derek Jeter. I got to fly out to LA and go to Fox Studio Lot and sit in the big executive's office. Probably shouldn't have accepted my call, but they did. While I pitched, integrating players into some of their shows and to doing these cool spots that would run against the World Series with New Girl, because that was a big show at the time. I started a concert series. I ended up, we started with this guy named Kevin Hammond, who you probably haven't heard of. I think his concert with us was the first and last concert Kevin Hammond ever performed. But it grew into producing shows with Jason Aldean and Avicii, and we did Jay-Z and Alicia Keys at Yankee Stadium, and it was phenomenal. And I bring up those experiences because at the time I had no idea how learning how to produce concerts would help me in my career. But like I said, my goals were never stringent. It was being open to opportunities as they presented themselves. And I got to throw a concert within one of my first, months working at YouTube, which I'll get to in a second. So things always come back. I like to say, build an arsenal of assets. You'll never know how you're going to use them in the future. And so doing concerts while at Major League Baseball was fun. It was amazing. It also came with its fair share of headaches, let me tell you. I think we lost electricity just before the Goo Goo Dolls went to perform. We had a group called All Time Low. I was like, okay, who are these guys? Sure, they could come perform. We had screaming teenage girls. You would have thought it was the Beatles from the 60s. Myself and the security guards had to form a barrier between the screaming fans and the band. It was quite an ambulance came. 2 girls passed out. That wasn't great to explain to my CMO. But the kicker was we would record this and send out 30 seconds worth of footage to press and everyone else afterwards. The kicker was when we did this and sent out the email, it was All Time Low at Major League Baseball. So if you didn't know the band All Time Low, it was my personal All Time Low. And so the kicker was that email that we had inevitably sent out. So I spent about 5.5 years at MLB, and it was a wonderful experience. Like I said, Matt, my boss, let me start this department and just have with it. But baseball is very cyclic. We kind of were doing the same thing over and over again. We talk about the All-Star game and which celebrity talent we were booking in the same way we talked about it last season and the season prior. And so I was on my couch one Saturday morning and I started to think of what company would I like to work for next. Virgin was very cheeky. It was very fun. It was pushing the envelope on really cool, innovative things. MLB was a little bit more conservative. And so the way that I played my next move was I wasn't looking for a dedicated communications role because I had done a lot of other things, produced events, concerts, etc. Instead of looking at a specific job, I said, okay, what company do I want to work for? Which company better suits who I am as a person? Which company do I believe in? And obviously Google came to mind. This was, 6.5 years ago. And it was a Saturday morning, just before I left for the World Series. I blindly applied online. And 2 weeks later, after I got back from the World Series, a recruiter called me. I have no idea how they found my resume. I am one of those unicorn stories because we get 15,000 applicants a day, I think. So I feel very lucky. The unlucky part was I had to do 17 interviews over the course of 9 months. So I applied the start of the World Series and I got the job the morning of the All-Star game in July. So it sort of was a nice little bookend. And then I came to Google. I've been at Google, like I said, about 6.5 years. I, again, started in an area of the business that I was like, okay, I might get bored of this pretty soon. I started specifically working on Google products. And so working with products isn't really my thing. I like working with talent and people and big projects. But I did it for about 1.5 years. And then at the time, YouTube was launching what was called YouTube Red. It's now YouTube Premium. And it was what was hosting our YouTube original content. And having done entertainment at both Virgin and Major League Baseball, I threw my hat in the ring. I said, let me help in any way that I can. And so I took out a 20% project, which Google allows for and encourages. They say it's 20% of your time. It's really an extra 20%. So you're doing 120% worth of work, but whatever. And so I got to work on launching YouTube Red. And I worked on a couple of different originals to start. And one of which was a Katy Perry live stream where she wanted to debut her new album. She wanted to do it in a way that really broke through and cut through the noise. And so she decided that she would live in a house and live stream her life for 96 hours straight. So that meant performing her new album, a couple songs, and going right into brushing her teeth and going to bed and her hair and makeup and all the various conversations we programmed and plugged in throughout the way. It was 96 hours live of Katy Perry that culminated with a concert. And I got to work on it because I knew how to produce concerts. And so, as mentioned, sometimes you never know how these random, opportunities or projects end up weaving their way back in. But I was lucky, it did. And that cemented my spot on the YouTube team. And so I was doing YouTube original work for a couple of years, got to work on all of the big shows that we launched along the way. Will Smith bungee jumping out of a helicopter over the Grand Canyon was a fun one. Confidentially, the night before, I'm in the hotel room with a glass of wine, writing reactive comms for Will Smith. God forbid something happened and didn't go as planned the next day when he was jumping out of a helicopter over the Grand Canyon. So it was a fun experience working in YouTube Originals. And then about a year and a half ago, I became the lead of the YouTube consumer communications team, which was new. And this is what I'm doing now. So I oversee 10 areas of the business. It equates to about 75% of the revenue that YouTube generates. It's everything from our YouTube creators to traditional talent like Will Smith, who are making a home on YouTube. It also includes our gaming division, fashion and beauty, sports, anything live that takes place on the platform, our brand moments, our consumer moments, YouTube spaces, our TV and film partnerships. I always forget a few, but it's basically a bulky area of the business. And everything that we do and work on, obviously, is with a consumer first mentality. And so that is what I'm doing now, 6.5 years later, since my days at Binghamton, however many years ago. Long tangent, told you.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. I'm going to invite students to ask any questions you might have.
Well, I'll ask you guys a few questions. What's everyone majoring in? Abby, I see you first. If you feel up for sharing, what are you studying? Let me know.
I'm a freshman, so I'm currently undecided, but I was leaning towards English.
Nice. Okay. Do you have any English and rhetoric questions? Since that was my major, and it's okay if you don't, but feel free to pepper them at me if you do.
I don't have any at the moment, but I will reach out if I do.
Sure. Well, here, I'll tell you a question that I typically got. So when I would tell people, oh, I'm studying English, the immediate reaction was, oh, so do you want to be a teacher? And so just know that if you study English, if you want to be a teacher, phenomenal. And if you don't, equally as phenomenal. I'd say that having the English background for me has helped me be a better communicator. And obviously I'm in the communications field, which is why I paired rhetoric with the English degree. But I'd say that I've worked with a lot of people over the years. Some are good communicators, some aren't. So even if you don't go into teaching or communications, having the English and rhetoric background, I've found to be incredibly useful because it just prepares you to communicate in all aspects of what communication looks like today. Anyone else who's studying what? Of course, no problem. And you don't have to share if you don't feel like it, but I'd love to hear.
I'm also an English rhetoric major. I'm a senior, so I'm about to graduate.
Nice. Yeah. How'd you like it? How'd you like studying those English and rhetoric for the 4 years?
I really liked it. I mean, like you had said, nothing has really changed. I guess there's nothing closer to a communications degree than that. So that's why I went with it. And I kind of like want to go into the same things that you're in. And it's kind of interesting hearing your whole story because my job on campus right now is to produce all the concerts and plan all the shows. So it's cool. Interesting hearing how like you having those skills got you to a place that I want to be at also. So it's just very interesting hearing all this.
That's great. Honestly, I know this sounds cheesy, but like you just say yes, you know, and you know, my current boss sometimes tells me that I say yes too much and my plate becomes overloaded. I do understand that I need to better prioritize. I get that. But saying yes has given me this opportunity and you know, to go from Virgin to Major League Baseball to now Google has given me the opportunity just by saying yes. And you don't know sometimes how various experiences are going to get you to where you want to be, but somehow they always come full circle. I'm still a volunteer with the Human Rights Campaign. HRC is the largest LGBTQ nonprofit in the country. And I started as a volunteer producing events, and now I'm on their board of directors. And so I'd say that all of those skills, while they're not, you know, I'm not doing this for Google or I didn't do it for Major League Baseball, all of those skills have been transferable as well. And so being able to still produce events and concerts for HRC while I wasn't at the start at Google, but then needed those skills to be dusted off to get the job on the YouTube side of the business, it was hugely helpful. So I'd say, you know, say yes if your plate can take it, and you'll never know how you'll use those experiences in the future. But I found them mostly, they've come full circle and have been beneficial. What's been your favorite concert that you've produced so far?
I've been in charge this year. So it was a lot of, obviously there was no real concerts this year. So I basically had to retrain myself how to do everything virtually. Um, but we did a virtual concert with Steve Aoki in the fall. So that was pretty cool. Like
Good one. That's great.
online EDM show. That was fun. That was my
Wow.
first virtual one. Trying to think, we had Foster the People freshman year that I helped produce in that one. That's the only outdoor spring fling that has happened my 4 years at Binghamton, unfortunately. But I think that one was probably my favorite. It was pretty fun.
That's great. Well, you know, honestly, who knows what the world's going to look like when we reopen? I do think that we'll continue. Look, people want to get back in person again. I do still think that there's opportunity now to take physical events and create hybrids out of them, where you'll still have the physical components, but you'll be able to bring a portion of it online for folks who can't be there in person. And so the skills that you've learned by doing one in person and the others virtually, I think will be helpful in this new hybrid world that we're going to be living in for a while. Good for you.
Thank you. I had also my Wi-Fi was cutting out when you were talking in the beginning about working at Virgin. I was just wondering what, like, because I know you said you got it like 2 weeks out of graduation. What was your job title? I know you're talking about doing like a bunch of different things. What was like, what did you look for?
Yeah, great question. So I had actually applied for an internship at Virgin the year prior, and at the time they weren't doing internships, and I ultimately ended up getting the internship with the Women's Sports Foundation, which was phenomenal. So a year later, I started to look, and because I had the English and rhetoric degree, I was looking for communication roles specifically. And I'll be honest, I didn't know what that meant, right? Like I remember my coach too, freshman year, had us write down what we wanted to do once we graduated, and I wrote PR for the advancement of women's athletics. I had no idea what PR was. I was like, obviously trying to, you know, stroke the coach's ego by saying I'm so into women's sports, which I am. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to get back into women's sports in some capacity one day, but I had no idea. I really didn't. And so, you know, a year later, it's now spring of my senior year. That same boss who I had applied for the internship with had reached out to see if I'd be interested in an internship. They said that they finally got, you know, budget for internships. And I told her I was actually graduating and I was looking for a full-time role. So she had a coordinator level position on her team. And so when you're looking most often within the industry, coordinator is the entry level position that you should be looking for. Not always at every company. I see that like tech companies have like funky and different titles these days. So look for years of experience instead versus a title. But I started looking for communications roles because frankly, my internships were in writing. When I was working at the Women's Sports Foundation, I was writing all of their newsletters. I wrote the script for their annual Salute to Women in Sports Gala that they did. So it was still very writing based. And so my first step was looking for a role in communications. That being said, like I said, I've never done traditional comms. Even when I was at Virgin, I was producing events and I was landing partnerships and everything else. I've always looked at things from, I don't like things packaged and handed to me. If you're looking to do product communications, for example, the product's baked. All you gotta do is go pitch it to press, right? For some people, great. For me, wasn't my jam. I like to come up and conceptualize ideas first, knowing they could then drive press, because ultimately in the communications field, your main job is to develop strategies, come up with creative ideas, but drive press. And sometimes when you're on the proactive side of communications, you are looking to drive press stories. So anything you guys consume, anything you read, you know, in the paper and magazines or online, obviously these days, anything that you watch, whether it's a Good Morning America segment or, you know, a Jimmy Fallon segment, there's a comms person or a PR person behind all of that. And so we're really, you know, working to make sure that consumers are consuming what we want them to. On the reactive side, our goal is to make sure you don't read anything or you read it in a way that's scripted to the company's advantage. And that usually has to deal with more of our crisis comms or snarly issues that we try to maintain and control to keep the company's brand upheld in stickier situations. Obviously, working at YouTube and Google, we get into a lot of sticky situations. And so crisis comms is a part of my general portfolio as well. But for you, I'd say look for years of experience, look at a coordinator title if that company lists it in that way. But I'd also look at companies that excite you, and companies that you feel like align with who you are and where you want to be. And I say that because it'll give you the opportunity to not only do comms, but do them in a way that's exciting to you. And for me, that was conceptualizing big ideas or doing things that were a little bit, coloring outside of the lines that I knew would ultimately end up driving press.
Thank you.
Of course.
Lauren, piggybacking off of that, we've had a lot of students who have gone on to work for Google that came from the engineering college and have heard about their interview process, which doesn't sound a whole lot different. I don't know if I've heard 17 interviews, but that they go in and they're doing technical interviews. Can you share with the students at all what what the interview process was like with Google, and like maybe what they should prepare for if they find themselves in a similar boat?
Absolutely. So I'd say, first, 17 interviews is a bit of an anomaly. I think our recruitment team now would say, if you have to get past 8, we're doing something wrong. And that's true. I was applying for a position on a new team. So they weren't really sure where the team was going to shake out. They didn't really know headcount at that point. And then the hiring manager went on mat leave for 6 months. So over the course of those 6 months, they still had me interviewing with various people because they wanted to keep me, warm, I guess, but it's strung it out a bit. I'd say now interviews at Google really shouldn't be more than 5, 8 at the most, if you're in the engineering field specifically. I think the engineers do get asked some of those questions you hear about, right? I'm not privy to what those interviews exactly look like because I obviously don't have an engineering degree. However, for me, what it was like, Google hires for the person and not the person for a specific role. Because the idea here is, and it's been my trajectory, that I'm not going to stay doing exactly what I interviewed for. So they shouldn't hire me for that. They're hiring candidates for Google as a company, knowing that a person could come up with a specific role to start, but then branch out and start something new. And if you're an engineer, devise something that never existed. Or if you're in my position, take on an area of the business that we're launching and roll with it. And so I'd say that if you are interviewing, no matter which field, if you're interviewing for Google, make sure that, and this I guess goes across the board for any of your interviews, obviously have your list of examples that you want to convey, but each example should say something different. And so again, and for those who majored in English, the trick is you don't always have to answer the question. I tell my executives this all the time, right? If you're asked a tricky question or if you're asked a question that we don't want to answer, don't. Figure out how to pivot. Do the same thing in interviews. If you're asked a question where you feel like you're being teed up to basically repeat information you've already given, you could say, happy to answer that again, but I really want to make sure you know this about me. And please reach out to me. I can give you guys proper talk points like I use with my executives on exactly how to pivot out of that. But you really want to make sure that you showcase who you are holistically. And so have varying examples that show different points of you, right? Maybe one is from an internship, maybe one is from how you volunteered, maybe one is just how you reacted or stepped up on an on-campus situation or project or whatever it might be. Various aspects of who you are, have those different examples because that's what we look for when we're hiring. If you end up repeating the same thing over and over again, it doesn't show just how dynamic you are.
I have another question, just kind of about interviewing and applying in applications, because the communications field is a popular one, and English major is also a popular one. How do you make yourself really stand out, especially when it's getting harder and harder to find jobs? And I know this is probably a hard question to answer, but I guess specifically someone who's looking for a communications job, how do you make yourself stand out?
It's a good question. I'd say for communications or for any job, what I look for is a diversity of experiences. So you all went to college. You all are going to commit the same amount of 4 years. What else did you do while you were there? Did you play an intramural sport? Did you play a D1 sport? Did you volunteer? Do you have internships, right? So for me, what I would look for if I'm hiring somebody fresh out of school is not just what they had to do, which is the 4 years of schooling, but the other things that they decided to do while they were doing the 4 years of schooling. So I'd say if you have anything that you could, even if you were a lifeguard, or if you babysat, or if you were my first job, I was a busboy actually at one of the local beach clubs. Like anything that you did that was outside what you had to do for school, include it. What did you learn, right? Your job as a communications person is going to be to spin things. How can you spin whatever you learned as a lifeguard to showcase who you are in a leadership position and why I should hire you, right? So take a look at all of the various experiences that you did during your 4 years there. And no matter what it was, figure out how to write it in a way on your resume that showcases, again, who you are and what you learned from that experience. That's what I look for, frankly, when I'm hiring someone. And that's the type of questions that I dig in on during interviews. I think that helps to set people apart. And then it's just sheer determination, right? And it's doing things like this. I give you all credit. Nobody has an hour of extra time, certainly not in your senior year, right? Or even your freshman year. Shit's crazy. But I give you guys credit for doing things like this because I hope you take away at least one thing. Maybe it's not from anything that I've said. Maybe some dots in your brain connected and you're like, you have an aha moment on your own. Great. Hopefully you take away something. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Follow up with me. Do more things like this. Build your network. I know it is often said, and I hate to repeat it, but it's helpful to know people. And it's not, my parents weren't in business. They're blue collar type of people. But they still gave me the understanding that it's about relationship building. My dad, he used to drive a truck for Pepsi, and then he did sales. He had a route where he would basically make sure that the truck drivers were delivering the Pepsi on time. The guy woke up at 5 o'clock, and by 7 o'clock, he was on the road to the beach to go surf for the morning. Then he'd come back in, he'd make a few phone calls, and then he'd go play golf. Why was he able to have a schedule like that? Because of the relationships he built. Every person with whom he worked with loved him. One deli referred my dad to another deli, and then to another deli, and to another deli. And so I got to learn that firsthand, that it is about building a web of people, because you never know how those people too are going to come back in your life, right? And they always do. So never burn a bridge, because they always come back. But I'd say too, it's again showcasing everything you've done in these 4 years, and spin it in ways to showcase what you've learned, and then do things like this. Build your network, build the people who are in your network, and all the dots will start to connect themselves.
Thank you.
Of course. Anyone else? Where's everyone calling in from? Are people still in Binghamton? Did you all go home? Where is everybody? I'm in Brooklyn.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. Where are you calling in from?
I'm from India, Mumbai.
Is that where you're currently based too? Or did you come?
Yeah, I am.
Nice.
No, I'll be arriving in Binghamton this fall as a graduate student for computer science.
Congratulations. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, go on, please.
I was going to ask you how is it in India with the pandemic right now? Are y'all doing okay?
It's actually pretty stressful because the cases are at a peak right now, especially in a population dense city like Mumbai. So we're all just locked up and trying to be safe and staying home. That's it.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. We see the numbers. I'm sorry that you are having to stay home, but I'm glad that you're safe. And fingers crossed that you'll be in Binghamton this fall, and fall is the best time. I know they say summer, but not many of us are there during the summer, so whatever. So fall is beautiful. Enjoy it. You're gonna love it. Congratulations.
Thank you. So I actually had a question. Since I'm majoring in computer science and at the risk of sounding ignorant, what does a day in the life of a consumer communications head look like? Could you just give me the down low?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked. And there's no such thing as an ignorant question. Every day is different. I'd say that because, sometimes I wake up and I think, okay, I'm going to be working on project X. And then you have a creator like Logan Paul, who does something that gets him in a lot of trouble. And now I'm dealing with a crisis comm situation. Or you have a reporter from the New York Times who writes in and they've uncovered something that we don't want them to. And now I'm in a meeting with our chief business officer and other executives to figure out how we're going to contain this, to make sure that the New York Times doesn't leak this big project that we don't want out there. So my day is really split between fun, proactive work where I'm working with our creators I'm working on a cool, the Met Gala, for example, is this big fashion and beauty. I'm not into fashion and beauty, but it's very big in the fashion and beauty industry. It's one of the biggest events of the year. We moved it online. It's exclusively on YouTube. What does that look like, right? How do you make these events virtual now? So I can go from doing really fun and creative, proactive opportunities. I still produce a bit. I'll be producing content one day and on set with some of our talent. And then again, get that phone call that there's some sort of crisis comm situation that's bubbled up that I have to go deal with. So I'd say it's a mix of being proactive and creative, while overarching, always have to be strategic. How and why do all these things fit together? Should we be talking about this or should we not be talking about this? Should I bring this story idea to this reporter or to this publication instead, or should I hold back? So there's strategy always, but it's a mix of being creative and proactive while dealing with reactive crisis comm situation, and then mixing executives. And executives are just a lot of fun. So dealing with executives on a day-to-day basis provides its own different type of color. And then I lead a team. And I'd say that, look, like I said, I was a captain of the softball team at Binghamton from the bench. I didn't start until my junior and senior year. Why? I am a fairly decent leader. But what I realized in becoming a manager here at Google is there's a difference between being a leader and being a manager. Those are two very different things. And being a manager of people during a global pandemic was very challenging. So this year, every day is spent, is my team okay? I'm more of a glass half full person. There are people on my team who are more of a glass half empty, and that's okay. I don't mean that in a negative way. We just show up differently. I've had to change how I show up to meet them halfway. I can't just be like, let's roll our sleeves and dig in. Come on, we got this, because I don't want to hear that. And so every day is met with all the work stuff. But because I'm a manager of people, I have to figure out the people stuff every day too. And it's worrying to make sure that my team is okay. Worrying, taking stuff off of their plate when their plates become too full. And even if my plate is completely spewing and way too much is on, still happening in and taking that little bit off to make their day easier, even if it completely makes mine, go to shit. So it's a lot of different things, but I appreciate that about a company like Google. It's very complex. I was at Major League Baseball for about 5.5, 6 years, and I was bored by the end. And I'd say here, I've been here at Google working on the YouTube side for 6.5, and I'm never bored. The work changes all the time, the complexities change all the time, and I really appreciate that about this company.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Anytime.
Gabriel, I saw your hand up earlier. Do you have a question that you wanted to ask?
No.
Yeah, we have you on mute. Looks like he's typing. Okay.
Do you want to put your question in the chat? I can answer it that way if that's helpful. The suspense is killing us, Gabriel. Typing.
Or Molly types, do you manage a team only on the East Coast, or do you manage them between the West Coast and the East Coast, and in between, because we know Google has so many different spots?
West Coast and East Coast. So some in New York, some in LA. And I'm also, I oversee the entire YouTube comms team from New York, in a sense. They don't report into me, but I'm sort of mother hen, if you will, making sure that they're okay and set up from the New York office.
All right, I got it working.
There we go. Go for it, Gabriel.
And everything. So firstly, I wanted to thank you. This has been incredibly informative. I love hearing about this story, and it really sounds like you've had a fantastic just experience jumping around like that. And one thing that kind of resonated with me is the way you seamlessly kind of move through the positions. And you mentioned how that was partially because you just said yes to a lot of things and had a very open mindset. So how do you think we could enable ourselves to kind of have that seamless transition and have an awesome experience like you did in the workforce?
Well, I appreciate it. Look, it's not without its headaches, right? Of course, because it's still work. But you're right. I feel so lucky. I really do. Not everybody could say that they love what they do. And my job my career has been, despite the headaches and the crisis comm situations and all the other, BS that goes along with it, it's fun. When the Yankees won the World Series for the first time at New Yankee Stadium, as a Yankee fan, to be on field with them while they celebrated was pretty fucking cool, right? So that's why I choose the company that you feel like you could be excited by. The work, and I like to say too, if 80% of your work is interesting, that's good. No, you're never going to hit 100%. There's some days where you feel like 100% and some days you feel like 20% or whatever. But if it averages out, don't correct my math. If it averages out to 80%, more often than not, you're doing something right, especially if you like the company, especially if you believe in the company. So I'd say that the transitions really, in part, were about saying yes, but the other half of that was doing the work before the work was asked of me. So it was showing up and showcasing what I can do before I was awarded the position. And so let's use the YouTube example. I was still on the Google product side of the business doing communications, but did that 20% project, threw my hat in the ring to say, oh, hey, boss over on the YouTube side, I hear that you're launching original content. My background is in entertainment. And honestly, too, it's not even like I came from a studio. I came from a sports league. I'd done entertainment at a sports league. It's still very different than essentially launching a new streaming service that's very studio and entertainment based. But I still threw my hat in the ring and I asked to take on extra work. And I proved myself by doing the work before they gave me the role. And I had to do that for a little while. There wasn't headcount. And so I ended up doing this hybrid role, working on Google products specifically, reporting into that boss, while doing almost 100% work on the YouTube side of the business. And I did that for about a year, which is probably a little bit too long. I probably should have spoken up and said, okay, what gives? Do you have headcount or not? But I kept at it. And so I'd say yes, even if you don't know how it's going to match up, it always does. And do the work before the work is asked of you. Because if I now have this new position on my team, or if I have this new project where I need help, right? I'm going to choose the person who has already stepped up versus the person who I have no idea exists. And so step up, work with different people, work with different executives, work with different colleagues. I like to tell my team too, what is your brand, right? We all know what consumer brands look like. When you think of Pepsi, it makes you feel a certain way. When you think of Google, it makes you feel a certain way. When you think of Morgan Stanley, it makes you feel a certain way, right? Those are those companies' brands, but we have brands too. And I hate to dehumanize us in that way. But when Gabriel enters a meeting, what do you want that room to feel, right? Do you want them to say, oh, hell yeah, I'm so happy that Gabriel's here and working on this project with us? Or who is this guy? Or he wasn't really receptive the last time I worked with him. Just remember how you show up creates who you are and what your brand is. And so even when you don't feel like fully showing up, try your best to fully show up, because you never know who's going to be in the room and you never know how or where they could be useful to you down the line. So it would be a mix of saying yes when appropriate and then trying your best to just, raise your hand and do the work before the work is even asked of you.
Definitely. That was incredibly helpful. And in relation to that question, how were you able to maintain a work-life balance and not lose your mind when you were taking on so much?
It's a good question. So maybe my first year at Google, I managed an interview between Google's chief marketing officer and Fast Company. And Fast Company was doing their productivity issue. And the CMO of Google, her name is Lauren Verrusio, she was asked something like that. And she said, there's no such thing as a work-life balance anymore. She said, it's work-life integration. And I've kept that in mind because there are times where I also keep LA hours, West Coast hours. Much of my executives are in LA. I'm based in New York and I'm a morning person. So if you do the math, I'm sort of up early, working early, and I'm also working late. And that doesn't leave much room for all of my volunteer efforts with HRC, my fiance, my family and friends, going down the street to grab a beer. But it's about work-life integration. That stuck with me. And so I'd say that, if I want to go and have dinner at 6 o'clock, I'll block off my calendar. I'm out at 6. I won't look at my phone until I'm done at 8. Then if I have to hop back online for a half hour from 8 to 8:30 just to clean out my inbox to make sure shit didn't hit the fan, so be it. I still had those 2 hours at dinner. So whatever works for you, I think, is reaching work-life integration. There's never going to be an equitable balance, in my opinion, especially in communications. And I will say, working in communications is kind of like a 24/7 role. And it doesn't mean, I don't mean to scare anybody, but if the New York Times writes in on a Saturday at 2 o'clock because they've got leaked information from one of our Google employees that they plan to print Monday morning, I'm now working over the weekend. But that means I'll also take that following Friday and give myself a lighter day. That's how I integrate things in that capacity. I'm a type A person though, and I really, I get my energy from having a lot to do. And I think, you know, again, jokingly, when I quit 3 times at softball at the start of my freshman year, I was afraid of taking on too much because I wanted to succeed. And what I realized is by figuring out how to balance or integrate both my studies with my sport and having that, not having too much free time is helpful for someone like me. So ask yourself, what makes you most successful? How do you like to operate? What do you like your plate to look like? I've also found during this pandemic that I get my energy from going to different events, producing events, flying out to LA a couple times a month, meeting with, you know, reporters for coffee in the morning. Just before the pandemic, I put on 100,000 miles on Delta. Fantastic. I have great miles to use now. Can't go anywhere or whatever, because I was going out to LA so much. And so while I don't necessarily want to go back to doing 100,000 miles every year, I do realize that I feed off of other people and being on set and doing all of these things. That's where I get my energy. So you have to ask yourself, where do you get your energy? What does work-life integration look like to you? Do you succeed when there's more on your plate or less on your plate? And not either of those aren't a bad thing, right? Some people are good at focusing on really specific projects, 1 at a time or 2 at a time, and going really hard in on those projects. And that's great. That's a different type of success. For me, I like having a bunch of different things going on and trying to achieve success with that. So it's a personal question, but I'd encourage you to flip it to work-life integration versus work-life balance, because the balance, especially while we're home and everything's virtual right now, a balance is really hard to keep.
All right, Lauren, I have another question for you while they think of more. One thing we at the Fleischman Center have been trying to help students realize is that find your fit. And I know you touched on that with the companies that they're applying for. And so one piece that I think a lot of students don't realize until they go out into the workforce is this idea of like affinity groups or employee assistant groups and things like that. So have you taken advantage of that at any of your companies that you've worked for? And have they been beneficial to you as you've maybe moved up the career ladder or anything like that?
Yeah, because I think it's a great point, Lindsay. I think more and more now, even than when I started, companies are offering additional opportunities. So why not take advantage of them? Why not figure out how you could meet new people or do different things? And again, it really continues to round you out. It enables you now, when you go to that next interview, to say, I was a part of X, here's what I did and here's what I learned. It's exactly what I was just describing before. At school, you're required to go to school. Great. What else did you do while you were there? It's the same thing. At work, you're required to do your work. Great. What else did you do while you were there, right? And so it's you never stop that. You never stop resume building in a sense. And so I've taken advantage of a bunch. I don't actually, not at Virgin. I don't think they had them at the time when I was there, but at MLB and then here again at Google. And you know, like I said, I'm on the board of directors for the Human Rights Campaign, and I do a lot of that type of work here at Google. And it just continues to build the bridge for me. So now I get to sit in on a conversation with the CEO of Google, who I've never got to sit in on anything with, and the CEO, or the president rather, of the Human Rights Campaign, just by virtue of having this dual role and taking advantage of this opportunity. And that's cool. That's an interesting conversation to see how both sides are going to come together to advance equality. Why not want to be a part of that? And so I think it's a fantastic point, Lindsay, and I'd say more and more companies are offering this. They recognize that this is what employees want. And so if there is an opportunity to do what's offered and something fits both within your interests, you have to be interested or else it's going to feel like more work. So if it fits within your interests and it fits within your schedule, I'd encourage you to go for it.
This is more a question just because I'm genuinely curious. Has your job at YouTube changed over the past, I guess you said you've been there like 6 years, as kind of the age of the online influencer and YouTubers and all that have become more and more popular? I'm just curious.
A great question. Yes. So 6.5 years ago, YouTube creators and influencers were still new and there was intrigue there. And I was able to really build campaigns around some of our YouTube creators in ways that we can't anymore. Why? Because everyone's an influencer these days, right? Or so the saying goes. And so it's not novel anymore. And YouTube also used to be home of the viral trend, right? Videos used to go viral on YouTube all of the time. Now there's TikTok. And anything that goes viral is happening on TikTok. So what does that mean for YouTube? And so I've actually spent the last year rebranding YouTube a bit to show the maturity of the business. So yes, we still have some of those viral videos. Of course, we still have our awesome creators. They make up 50% of the revenue on our platform, right? These are huge things that we will never lose sight of. They are in our DNA. But what is YouTube now, 15 years later? It's a mature business. And now I get to talk about all of the other areas that we've incorporated into YouTube that makes us a mature business versus a TikTok that's just starting out. I like to tell reporters that TikTok is what YouTube was 15 years ago. Cool, great. Like, go watch the ocean spray guy. He's awesome, loved him. But here's what we got going on over here. And so things change and they shift very quickly now. And so to be a strategic comms professional, how are you making sure that your company isn't being left behind when more and more competitors are coming to the table? And so what I always try to look at, where are we unique? How are we unique? What value does YouTube provide that the others don't? And how can we lean into that and position ourselves in a way that's like, yeah, we don't have competitors. TikTok's not a competitor. Netflix is not a competitor. Facebook is not a competitor. We actually work with them in various different ways. And here's how this all comes together. YouTube is now a very mature business doing X, Y, and Z. And so it goes back to spinning things a bit, right? But really, as you continue to progress and stay at a company, and while other companies come up into the landscape, what's the uniqueness of your business and how can you position it in a way that's still interesting and drives news value? Because if you don't have news value, then reporters don't have a news story. So you have to always figure out what the news is, how it's unique, how it's different, and how you're going to position it in the marketplace to make not only reporters interested, but consumers interested as well.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions if anyone has them.
All
Like
right.
Shelby put one in the chat. Shelby said she's an English creative writing student and I'm considering a dual degree with that in business administration with a concentration in either marketing or communications. What are the major differences between the two fields and what would you say is the aspect of your job that stands out most for you?
Great. Well, first of all, congratulations, because it was time consuming even reading all the things that you're majoring and minoring in. So congrats to you. Well done. So the differences between communications and marketing, both are extensions of brand representation, right? So both the marketing teams and the communications teams are figuring out how best to build a brand, shape the brand, and represent the brand to an external audience. That external audience, most of the time, is consumers. I'd say a marketing person's role has changed over the course of the past 10 years or so. Marketing very much was what you visually consumed. So think billboards, think spots or commercials, think ads that would run alongside your Facebook page, right? It was visual consumption. Now, let me finish marketing. Now things have changed a bit, right? Static billboards are no longer the thing. So how can marketers continue to reach consumers in new and innovative ways? So coming up with really big partnership ideas, coming up with different type of creative projects that ultimately market the brand, but no longer in your traditional ways of billboards and commercials. Communications is a little bit different. So we're still representing the brand, but we do it in the written word, essentially. So marketing, think visual; communications, think written word. And that means we're constantly working with reporters. So I can come up with and produce any type of concert or piece of content or whatever I want as a communications professional, but ultimately the goal is to drive press stories or broadcast segments. So we're more of, we deal with press every day, all day. Anything that I do at the end of the finish line has to have press stories afterwards, or else I'm not doing my job. Marketing people don't deal with press at all. So visual, mainly on one side, no press, more of the written word, and press on this side. Press too, they've got a lot going on, especially with COVID. There were a lot of job loss, reporters, unfortunately, that experienced. And so because they have so much going on, oftentimes we're kind of writing the stories even. So not verbatim, but we are writing the pitches and shaping the stories in a way that makes it really easy for a press person to say, oh yeah, great, I will run this in the style section of the Times this weekend, fantastic. So press, non-press. I hope that helped answer it a little bit. No problem. And we work very closely. And one thing to keep in mind too, at many companies, the press team reports into marketing. And so marketing uses everything that they do to represent the brand. And then they use press and social as levers. I disagree with that strategy because then by function of that, press people are only doing what marketing people tell them to do and only working on specific campaigns and things that marketing comes up with. Thankfully here at Google, it's not structured that way. Communication is on par with marketing. And so oftentimes they'll come up with a campaign that will just say, I don't think this has press legs and we're not going to support it. Or we're really developing big strategies with executives and with various teams that will implement across the business and ultimately with press, but they're more partners to us at Google.
All right, well, it is almost 1 o'clock, so I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you, Lauren, a huge thank you to you. And it was really great to hear your story and all the awesome things that you've been able to do. Thank you for helping out our students. Again, if you would like to connect with Lauren, look for her on LinkedIn. And we will be posting this recording on our YouTube channel. Within the alumni office. So if anyone needs to rewatch it or what have you, it will be there. So yeah, on behalf of the alumni office in Fleischman, thank you. And we look forward to working with you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It was a really great conversation. Please connect with me on LinkedIn too. And congratulations, Binghamton. I mean, we're getting married in August and half the wedding list are former Binghamton people. Like I had a great time. It was a really awesome 4 years. So have fun while you're there too, enjoy it. And if I can answer any other questions, you guys know where to find me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye guys.